One strike off, another one threatened. And this was supposed to be the age of the train. Well, here we go again. Another rail strike. Is it on or is it off?
Back on the issue on which you went on strike in January, flexible rosters. You lost wages. The industry lost customers and freight. There are no winners.
For TVI, Brian Gould has been looking at the current state of union management relationships on the railways, the management wanting greater productivity, the members looking for job security.
2:50 in the afternoon. Pat Quigley drives the high-speed train from London to Leeds. A railwayman for 35 years, Pat Quigley and his ASLEF colleagues are determined to resist what they see as a provocative action by the British Rail Board.
BRB have been fighting the dispute for 12 months now. The writing is surely on the wall for them, and they know they cannot win. They're in a no-win situation. And I would say this to the BRB management, and this is a quote from our beloved leader in Parliament over the Falkland issue. Compromise only benefits the aggressor. There can be no compromise.
Yesterday, Pat Quigley started work after lunch. It's the pattern of his day which underlies the flexible rostering dispute. At 2:25, he prepared his train for the journey. At 2:50, he set off for Leeds. 5:30, arrived in Leeds. 10 minutes late, so he lost his tea break while he prepared for the return journey. 5:45, set off for London. 8:36, arrived in London. Spent half an hour carrying out safety checks and making out timesheets before leaving his train. 9:15, he'd finished work, but he couldn't go home until 10:25, when his 8-hour shift finished. By any standards, a busy day. But it's that last 3/4 of an hour that causes the problem. British Rail want him to stop work after 7 hours on a day like this and do a longer journey, working up to 9 hours on the next day. But ASLEF have never agreed to give up the 8-hour day first negotiated in 1919.
The whole of our agreements and our whole attitude to working on the railway has been based around the 8-hour day. Every agreement we've got has been based on the 8-hour day agreement, and we're afraid that once this 8-hour day is pulled away, the rest of our agreements will collapse and would have to be probably renegotiated and possibly not favourably. And we would have no established working arrangements, and we wouldn't know where we go from there. From the first time that the flexible rosters actually are imposed on us, we wouldn't know where to go.
Would it mean less money for you?
We estimate that it'll be something like £12 to £15 a week.
It's not just money that's at the basis of the dispute. Flexible rostering would mean 4,000 fewer drivers, something that would please Jim Urquhart, the British Rail Board member responsible for operations and productivity.
The ASLEF want a 39-hour working week, but with no contribution at all by the staff towards achieving it. They want to maintain the 8-hour day. Now, in very simple arithmetic, 8 does not divide into 39. Therefore, if there are 8-hour shifts with a 39-hour week, there are either more days off for nothing, or there's an hour's overtime a week. Now, flexible rostering, 7 to 9, gives us the opportunity to accommodate a 39-hour week without overtime. Now, it's as simple as that.
Why are these improvements in productivity, which seem to the outsider fairly marginal, why are they so important?
The improvements are not marginal, I can assure you. The 67% of the total cost of operating a railway are labour costs. We must ensure effective use of labour. We must ensure that the costs of running a railway are minimal, consistent with our business objectives, with our social, with our railway objectives. This means that we've got to look at manning practices. Now, the particular example you're discussing could be said to be relatively small, but if indeed the ASLEF approach had been adopted throughout British Railways, not accepted by the other unions, then the cost of introducing the 39-hour week would have been about £100 million a year, we calculate.
On this viaduct, the red marks warn of falling masonry. British Rail have had to put a red mark on every column. Shipton in Oxfordshire, another rural station in disrepair. And even on the busy commuter lines, the picture is one of dereliction. Roofless stations, old stock, and a demoralized workforce. Dennis Clayton is a senior railwayman at Blackheath Station in London. As he does the 101 little jobs that keep the station going, he feels he's fighting a losing battle.
When it rains, well, we have to walk around in wellies and waders. It's as bad as that. We have, when it pours down with rain from the top of the street, the water pours in like a fountain, and we can't cope with it. It comes in, it floods our storerooms out to about a foot, it floods the waiting room out to 3-4 inches. People are inconvenienced, they have to miss trains. When the track gets flooded, we have to stop the service. Now, this is not good enough for our passengers. I put it down all to this lack of money. This station wants improving and wants modernising. You've seen the water leaks in every time we have a rainstorm, it leaks in. There is no way that we are going to improve this station, not as staff. We try our hardest, and yet we suffer the brunt of ministerial interference and restraint. And this is what's happening all the time. It is us at this barrier from our passengers. We want to help our passengers. We want them to travel in comfort. But what can we do? We haven't got the money, and we need the money for this station, and we need it quickly. This railway is not the railway that I knew after the war. There was a time when it was a good railway, was a good job. But now I come to work and I don't know if I'll be employed next month. I don't know whether I'm going to be on the dole in 3 months' time. And there's just absolutely no confidence from the men in the railway today.
The men at this railway maintenance workshop in South London feel that they're battling against the odds too. There's no money for new coaches, so they're fully stretched in keeping the existing stock operational. And 40% of that dates from 1936. The old stock needs frequent and time-consuming maintenance. The fittings and furnishings are sometimes renewed, but the bogies, the suspension, and therefore the comfort of the passenger's ride remain pre-war. Sid Wheel is General Secretary of the NUR.
We're actually spending less every year than we require simply to keep the thing ticking over. And we are decaying rapidly. In fact, I can take you onto main routes. Euston to Birmingham, we have to put in speed restrictions on because the line is not safe for high-speed running. I commute myself, by the way. I get fed up with trains breaking down, trains late because there is no guard, no driver, or the points failure. These are symptoms of decay. So what annoys him is the very things that I'm complaining about. You go to the King's Cross suburban area, which has been recently modernised, you find less complaints there because the service measures up to the sort of fare he pays. That's what Bedford St Pancras will prove. I have found that giving people a good service, they don't mind paying for it. It's when they're paying through their nose for a rotten service that they complain and squeal.
In fact, this new stock for the Bedford St Pancras line proves something different. £150 million of investment lying idle. Everything is push-button controlled. And that's the problem. The trains stand empty and unused in their sidings, waiting for the NUR and British Rail to reach agreement on manning levels. The trains are meant to operate without guards, but the NUR, anxious as ever to protect jobs, has other ideas.
On Bedford St Pancras, which didn't say I had to do anything other than to look at this piece of railway without any preconceived ideas. And we therefore decided to use all the information, the knowledge that's in this building about railway operation, and we know something about it because my people work railways, to apply that sort of common sense to that bit of railway, and I presented a plan to the board 6 months ago. That plan is workable and should be tested, and the last offer was try it experimentally from autumn to December, monitor it as an open station, as a new concept, and after that time we are convinced everybody will accept this experiment as being the best test that you could apply. That's done. On all the other things, I haven't just made gestures, I have delivered.
In fact, the NUR argues for the retention of guards, who would be given extra duties like ticket collecting. But that would defeat British Rail's purpose.
The investment which has been made supports the operation of the trains in safety with only one man. It fully meets the requirements of the Department of Transport, who've laid down very stringent regulations for the operation of trains with only one man, and it accords with practice on the continent and in this country too.
So how much would the NUR proposal cost?
The NUR plan would probably cost in the region of £300,000 per year additional, and I would need to recruit an extra 60 guards.
Would British Rail be getting anything for that money?
No, I would be getting the same as I've got now virtually. I would have no upgrading of productivity. I would have no move out of the 19th into the 21st century.
So passengers from Bedford to St Pancras must wait for a modern service. British Rail say this is typical of the arguments over productivity. But Sid Wheel is adamant that he's delivered on all his undertakings. For example, on open stations without ticket collectors and flexible rostering.
We've agreed to experiments at a pace quicker than the board can cope with on open stations. One in the Western region, one in Scotland, one we've agreed only a short time ago from Aberdeen down to Edinburgh in that suburban area. On flexible rosters, not delivered on that. 90% of the people I represent are operating these. Working hours have been adjusted, social life has been improved, and we're getting the rewards, and that's operating.
I put it to Jim Urquhart of the British Rail Board that there were 6 productivity issues outstanding between the NUR and British Rail, and that Sid Wheel claims that his union has delivered on all of them.
The NUR have delivered on flexible rostering. They have delivered. The NUR have failed to deliver on the manning of passenger trains and the manning of freight trains. They have failed to deliver, either technically or realistically.
They may have failed to deliver the substance of any actual improvement in productivity, but surely Sid Wheel would argue that he has met the terms of the agreement he made.
The terms of the agreement, let's take freight, the manning of freight trains. The terms of the agreement said there would be 2 or 3 experiments by the end of 1981. As we sit here talking today, not one train has yet run under the sole control of a driver.
The NUR says a freight train without a guard wouldn't be safe. Lyle Wiltshire is a freight train guard. He's naturally worried about his job, but in defending his position, isn't he jeopardizing the jobs of other railway men?
Oh yes, it bothers me. As most people would say, that a strike does not help anyone. I'm very mindful of the situation as far as the industry is concerned. I'm also equally mindful of the plight that we as the workers of the industry find ourselves in.
If there is a strike, how confident is he that his job would survive?
That's a very good question. I'm not too confident, I must say. I'm not too confident. But then there you are. If the powers that be feels that the modern technology and all that goes with it can eradicate the role of a guard, then that's left to be seen.
The unions have seen many jobs go in the last 10 years, 16,000 in the last 16 months alone. But to some, that's not enough.
There was a very large reduction before 1970, the kind of Beeching era. Railway productivity rose by 50%. There was another burst of shedding jobs, you know, in the mid-70s when Tony Crossan got tough with them. And there's been a bit of shedding last year, mainly closing down parcels depots. But in fact, there hasn't been any continuous shedding of labour. And what's more, what there has not been due to the alteration of restrictive practices and working arrangements.
Rail traffic has also fallen fast, partly as a response to the recession, and that has affected productivity.
Between 1970 and 1980, output per man, traffic per man, declined by about 5% on the railways. So there haven't been any productivity gains, merely productivity declines.
Dr. Chris Nash disagrees. He takes a more favourable view of what ASLEF and the NUR have achieved.
Productivity is a difficult concept to measure, and there are many different approaches. But in terms of the train kilometres run per man, productivity has been rising steadily at about 1% per annum. Now, the traffic actually carried by those trains tends to fluctuate according to external events like the state of the economy. But over the last few years, say since 1975, whilst train kilometres per man has gone up by 6%, the average load carried by a freight train has gone up by about 25%, and the average load carried by a passenger train has risen slightly. So overall, I think there is evidence of improvement there.
For 150 years, no one has been able to conceive of a Britain without railways. But today's disputes take place against the background of rapidly changing attitudes. Ian Heggie, a former advisor to the Minister of Transport, explains the change.
The commercial environment in which the present dispute is taking place is quite different from what has happened in the past. Over the last 3 years, major attempts have been made to introduce some disciplines of the marketplace into the rail environment. The bus licensing system on the intercity bus services has been relaxed, so that you now have an excellent system of intercity bus services that provide a very good alternative to rail services. The law has been changed on car sharing to make it much easier for people to give lifts. The government has tried to make motorcycling safer and is encouraging cycling and also trying to provide better facilities for cyclists. And all of this is providing more competition for the railways, who previously had a total monopoly on passenger movements. The second thing that has changed is public attitudes, because in the last 3 years, people in the private sector and people working in British Leyland and in British Steel have gone through enormous trauma. They've had to change their working practices, they've had to work very much harder, they've seen colleagues thrown out of work for no fault of their own and having to fight their way back into employment. And these people are not now going to dig into their pockets to provide extra tax money to insulate the rail unions from similar vagaries of the marketplace.
The bitterest battle in any rail dispute is fought out in commuter land. 70% of all those who come in to work in London travel by train, traditionally the strongest pro-rail pressure group. But that too may be changing. David Crouch, MP.
I have several thousand constituents who come into London to work every 5 days a week. They are part of the 1 million people that come in and out of London, which is an enormous travelling public. Many years ago, my constituents, if we'd had a strike like this, would have been on to me, would have asked me to go and meet them, would have had delegations, would have been writing to me about the prospect of a rail strike and saying, how the hell are we going to get to work? I haven't had a single letter. I've spoken to other members of Parliament with travellers like this. I said, how much correspondence have you had? Not a letter.
But you would no longer see your commuter constituents as automatic allies of a rail system.
No, I wouldn't at all. I really do think that they have themselves over recent years been saying, we're getting tired of the railway system. Let's get to London by some other means.
How far is Sid Wheel of the NUR aware of this change? Is he surprised at the strength of the view that we might not need a railway?
No, at some point in time, this argument had to be thought through. I don't think, and I accept that I am biased on this, but I don't think a highly industrialised society like Britain can operate without an effective and efficient railway service and a network about the shape and size we've got.
I'm not at all sure that's true. In fact, I think a lot of the traffics which are at risk are traffics they ought to in fact get rid of anyway, and quite a lot of the cuts they're talking about making are cuts they ought to be making. They're talking about reducing intercity passenger train mileage by 25%. Well, they simply run too many very lightly loaded intercity trains. With an average of 35% of the seats full and the rest empty. I think the one thing they possibly stand to lose, but even there they may well lose a lot of it in the long run anyway, is business with the post office. All the rest, I think, that they stand to lose, they could probably well do without. And if they were forced into getting rid of it and shedding it as a result of the strike, we should probably be much better off as a nation. And they'd probably be much better off as a railway system.
The rail debate has a long way to go. It's just conceivable that a long strike might clarify the issues. With improved productivity, more public money could be invested. That might produce a railway that does at least work. Or British Rail could be run commercially, with only those bits surviving which pay their way, and much freight and passenger traffic going elsewhere. Railway workers and their unions have a clear view about that.
There's no industrialised nation in Western Europe, by the way, that accepts that cockeyed philosophy. If you go to France, you go to Germany, you go to Holland, all of them accept that railways have a vital role. And as the fuel and energy crisis becomes more acute, everybody realises this is the best way to move people and freight. What you want is a sensible policy. Now, what's lacking in Britain is that approach, that acceptance that railways are vital, and measuring up to what that costs. We are the least assisted railway in Western Europe, and yet we are as efficient as many and more efficient than a great deal of others. And yet we are saddled with these ball and chain impediments, in the sense that my people are not being given the tools to do the job.
It's sometimes suggested that other big British industries, British Steel, British Leyland, have all had their industrial showdowns, their bloodletting, and that there's no reason why British Rail should be immune from that. Is that the way you see it?
I don't see bloodletting as part of the scene at all. I see a major problem which the railway men, the railway trade unions, and the management have in adapting what is, in historical terms, an old railway, an old system with many traditions, but which has many modern opportunities available to it, and there are complications in adapting to that change. It can't be done too quickly, but it must be done progressively and positively. That is what we seek to do, not to have confrontation or bloodletting or showdowns.
But are you aware of the possibility, at any rate, that these disputes are now taking place against a rather changed background, that what was previously unthinkable, that we could do without a railway or we could do with a much smaller railway, that is now much closer into the centre of some people's thinking, perhaps even in the government?
Yes, and I, as a railwayman, I'm very conscious of that. The days when the country had to have a railway, I think these days have gone. I think it's very desirable the railway should have a railway, or the country should have a railway. I think that this very important national asset has a tremendous amount to offer towards the solution of internal transport requirements in the UK. But I don't think that we are absolutely essential. I think we're highly desirable, and I want that desirability to be uppermost in people's mind. And the best way to do it, I repeat, is to be efficient and to be effective.
A report by Brian Gould on the ironies of the situation in which both sides protest they want the best for the railways and the railmen. Today there was hope that the ASLEF strike, threatened to begin on Sunday, could be called off. Both sides in the dispute have been in separate meetings at the Conciliation Service, ACAS. ASLEF leader Ray Buckton said he had constructive proposals, but British Rail are insisting ASLEF call off the strike before they talk to the union. Tonight, the meeting ended with the message that the strike was still on, but it seems talking will still continue tomorrow. From TVI, good night.